It's 7:14 in the morning.
You haven't even brushed your teeth yet, and your hand is already reaching for something in crinkly plastic. A granola bar, a flavored yogurt, a slice of bread from a bag that lists 18 ingredients you can't pronounce. You eat it without thinking, because that's the whole point of it. It was built not to require thinking. And here's the specific, verifiable fact most people don't know. In Hainan Komchamichin, researchers at the National Institutes of Health put people in a metabolic ward, gave one group ultra-processed meals and another group whole food meals matched for calories, sugar, fat, and fiber, and the ultra-processed group spontaneously ate about 500 extra calories a day, without noticing, without intending to, without feeling like they'd eaten more. That's not a detox claim. That's not a cleanse. That's a measured, published number from a controlled human trial. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why that happens, what your body does the moment you stop it, and what actually changes. Hour by hour, day by day. Across 7 days without ultra-processed food. So let's be clear about what this is not. This is not a video about toxins leaving your body, because your liver and kidneys are already doing that job every single day, processed food or not. There is no juice, no tea, no 7-day miracle that flushes anything. What actually happens is more interesting than that, because it's not about removing poison. It's about removing a very specific kind of engineering. And engineering is the right word, because the food didn't get this way by accident. Let's start with the study I just mentioned, because it's the single best piece of evidence we have, and it deserves more than a passing mention. The lead researcher was Kevin Hall, and his team's design was almost unfair in how clever it was. They took 20 adults, locked them in a research ward for 4 weeks, and fed them, in random order, 2 weeks of ultra-processed meals and 2 weeks of unprocessed meals. Same calories offered. Same sugar, fat, salt, and fiber on paper. The only real difference was the degree of processing. And yet, given free access to eat as much or as little as they wanted, people ate more on the ultra-processed weeks. Not a little more. About 500 calories a day more, consistently, and they gained roughly 2 pounds over 2 weeks on that diet, while losing weight on the whole food weeks. Nobody told them to eat more. Their bodies just did it. Here's the part most people get wrong when they hear that story. They assume it's about willpower. It isn't. This was a randomized trial with no calorie targets and no instructions to restrict anything. The extra eating happened automatically, which tells you the mechanism isn't psychological weakness. It's a physiological response to something in the food itself. So what is that something? This is where we get to the actual mechanism, and it comes down to 2 words: eating rate. In Hall's study, people ate the ultra-processed meals noticeably faster, about 10% more calories per minute. And eating speed matters more than almost anyone realizes, because your body doesn't know how full you are the instant food hits your stomach. It takes time. Your gut releases satiety hormones, cholecystokinin, GLP-1, peptide E, in response to stretch and nutrients in your stomach and small intestine, and that signal takes something like 5 to 20 minutes to reach your brain and register as "I've had enough." If you eat a meal in 8 minutes instead of 20, you can plow straight through that stop signal before it ever arrives. Ultra-processed foods are engineered to be eaten fast. They're soft, they dissolve quickly, they require less chewing. So you outrun your own biology. Now here's the second layer, and this is the one that surprises people the most. Food scientists have a real, industry-recognized concept called the Bliss point. A term coined by food researcher Howard Moskowitz, who spent decades using sensory testing to find the exact combination of sugar, fat, and salt that produces maximum pleasure without triggering the brain's natural, "That's enough of this flavor" response. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a documented methodology used across the packaged food industry. Whole foods don't have a bliss point in this sense. An apple is intensely apple-flavored, and that intensity limits how much of it you want in one sitting. That's called sensory-specific satiety. The more of one flavor you eat, the less appealing that exact flavor becomes, bite by bite. Ultra-processed foods are engineered specifically to blunt that effect. A chip that's salty, fatty, and starchy all at once triggers multiple reward pathways simultaneously, so no single flavor note builds up enough to make you stop. Here's your rehook, because this next part changes how you'll think about cravings for the rest of your life. None of what I just described requires anything to be addictive in the dramatic sense people throw around. It's simpler and, honestly, more unsettling. It's just really good engineering aimed at a very old, very simple reward system that evolved for a world without factories. So now, let's ask the question the whole video is really about. What happens when you take that engineered input away for 7 days? Let's walk through it in order, because the timeline itself teaches you the mechanism. In the first 1 to 2 days, most people report something that feels a little like withdrawal. Mild headache, irritability, a low hum of craving, sometimes fatigue. This is real and worth being honest about instead of dramatizing. Some of it is simply caloric and sugar adjustment. If you were used to frequent blood sugar spikes from refined carbohydrates, removing them can cause a temporary dip in energy as your body recalibrates its baseline insulin response. Continuous glucose monitor studies have repeatedly shown that meals built around refined, ultra-processed carbohydrates produce sharper, faster glucose spikes followed by steeper crashes compared to meals with more fiber, protein, and intact structure. And it's that crash, not some toxin leaving your system, that produces the shaky, irritable feeling people mistake for detox symptoms. There's also a genuinely separate mechanism happening at the level of your brain's dopamine system, and I want to be careful here, because the evidence is real, but it comes mostly from animal research, and we should say that honestly rather than overstate it. Neuroscientist Paul Kenny's lab at Scripps Research found that rats given continuous access to a rotating menu of high-sugar, high-fat foods showed reduced sensitivity in dopamine dye receptors, the same receptor changes seen in some studies of substance dependence. And those rats needed more stimulation to feel the same reward. Human research on this exact mechanism is less settled. Psychologist Ashley Gerhardt at the University of Michigan has spent years developing the Yale Food Addiction Scale specifically because clinicians noticed behavior patterns in some people: loss of control, cravings, continued use despite wanting to stop, that resembled substance use patterns. It's not proven that every person's brain responds this way, and it's not the same as a hard drug. But the honest version of the story is this. For some people, some of the time, engineered food does seem to blunt reward sensitivity, and pulling it away for a few days can produce a real, if modest, recalibration, which is likely part of why cravings peak early and then fade rather than staying constant. And they do fade. By day 3 or more, most people notice the sharp craving edge softening. This lines up with what we'd expect if the dominant driver really is reward system recalibration rather than physical dependence. There's no substance with a pharmacological half-life driving this, just a reward circuit relearning what normal stimulation looks like without an artificially amplified signal. Now here's a mechanism that gets far less attention than it deserves, and it might be the most surprising one in the whole video. Your gut bacteria start changing within days, not weeks. A research team at Duke University led by Lawrence David published a study in the journal Nature showing that when people switch to an entirely plant-based, high-fiber diet or an entirely animal-based, low-fiber diet, measurable changes in gut microbial composition showed up within just 1 to 2 days. days. Your gut microbiome isn't some slow, months-long project. It's a fast-responding ecosystem, and what you feed it changes who's living in there almost immediately. This matters directly for ultra-processed food, because most of it is stripped of fiber during manufacturing. That's part of what makes it soft and fast to eat. Fiber is the primary food source for a huge portion of your gut bacteria, and research out of Stanford, led by microbiologist Justin Sonnenberg, has shown something striking in mice. When fiber intake drops, certain bacterial species that specialize in breaking down fiber start to starve and shrink in number, and this is the unsettling part. If that low-fiber pattern continues across generations, some of those bacterial species don't fully recover even when fiber is reintroduced. That's an animal study, so we can't say the exact same permanent loss happens in a human in 7 days. But the direction of the effect is consistent with human research too, And it tells you why the fiber you get from real food isn't just raw veg. It's literally feeding a population of organisms that, when well fed, produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids, including butyrate, which is the primary fuel source for the cells lining your colon and is linked to lower gut inflammation. So here's the honest 7-day picture forming. Within 1 to 2 days, your gut microbial population composition is already shifting in response to increased fiber. By day 3 to 5, fiber fermenting bacteria that may have been suppressed start to have more raw material to work with, and short-chain fatty acid production can begin increasing. This isn't a dramatic transformation. You're not becoming a new person biologically in a week, but it is a real, directionally consistent, measurable shift, and it's one of the more solid pieces of evidence in this entire topic. Let's bring in one more piece, because it explains something almost everyone has actually felt but never understood: the puffiness. Ultra-processed foods are, on average, extremely high in sodium. It's a cheap, effective preservative and flavor enhancer, which is exactly why it's everywhere in packaged food. Sodium pulls water into your bloodstream and tissues to maintain concentration balance. The Sodium trial, a well-known NIH-funded study published in Hainan Komchum Le Mot, led by researcher Frank Sachs, showed that reducing sodium intake produced measurable reductions in blood pressure within about 2 weeks, with some of that effect from reduced fluid retention showing up faster than that. So when you stop eating ultra-processed food for 7 days, a genuine part of what you're feeling, less bloating, a bit less puffiness around the face and hands, isn't imagination. It's simple fluid mechanics, less sodium in, less water held onto. It's a modest effect, not a dramatic transformation, but it's formation. But it's real, and it explains why people so often say they feel lighter within the first week, even before any meaningful fat loss could have occurred. Let's return to the eating speed mechanism one more time, because there's a new piece to add to it now that we understand the hormone signal delay. If ultra-processed food gets you eating fast enough to outrun your fullness signal, and whole foods require more chewing and digestion time, then simply switching foods, without changing portion sizes on purpose, naturally slows your eating rate and gives those satiety hormones time to catch up before you've eaten past the point of being full. That's the same mechanism from Hall's Nye study, but now you can see it playing out as an active, day-to-day experience rather than just a lab result. Here's your mid-video rehook. If you've been assuming this is going to end with eat clean as vague advice, it isn't. Because everything we just walked through points to specific, mechanical actions, not moral ones. So let's get into what to actually do with all of this. First, learn to recognize the category, not just the ingredient list, because staring at ingredient names is overwhelming and not that useful on its own. Brazilian researcher Carlos Monteiro at the University of São Paulo developed something called the NOVA classification system, which sorts food not by nutrients but by degree of processing. Unprocessed or minimally processed foods, processed culinary ingredients like oil and salt, processed foods like canned vegetables or simple cheese, and ultra-processed products, which are industrial formulations, typically containing ingredients you would never find in a home kitchen. Hydrogenated oils, protein isolates, flavor compounds, emulsifiers designed purely for texture and shelf life. You don't need to memorize ingredient chemistry. You just need to ask one question about what's in front of you. Could this have been made, more or less, in a regular kitchen? If the answer is clearly no, that's your ultra-processed signal, and that's the category driving the fast eating and bliss point mechanisms we talked about. Second, deliberately slow your eating rate, especially at the meals you're most tempted to rush through. Given that the fullness signal takes roughly 5 to 20 minutes to reach your brain, a simple, mechanically grounded trick is to put your fork down between bites or to make sure a meal takes at least that long. This isn't a vague mindfulness suggestion. It's a direct countermeasure to the exact hormone timing mechanism from the Nye study. Third, rebuild fiber intake at every single meal, not just once a day, because the Duke study showed microbial shifts happening within 1 to 2 days of a dietary change, which means the sooner and more consistently you introduce fiber, The sooner that fiber-fermenting bacterial population has fuel to expand and start producing those beneficial short-chain fatty acids. Vegetables, legumes, whole grains, fruit with the skin on. These aren't abstract healthy food categories, they're specific fuel for a specific process happening in your colon right now. Fourth, expect the craving curve and use it instead of fighting it blindly. Since the early day irritability and craving intensity is consistent with a reward system and blood sugar recalibration rather than a permanent state, knowing that day 1 and 2 are typically the hardest, and that day 3 or 4 usually brings real relief, gives you something psychologically useful, a known shape to an otherwise confusing experience. You're not white-knuckling indefinitely. You're riding out a specific, time-limited physiological adjustment that the research suggests has a beginning, middle, and end. Let's go back to that morning. The alarm, the crinkly wrapper, the granola bar eaten without a single thought. Nothing about that moment was really a choice in the way it felt like one. It was the output of a food product engineered by people who understood eating speed, sensory-specific satiety, and reward chemistry better than most of us understand our own bodies. That's not a reason for shame. It's the opposite. It means the sluggishness, the bloating, the low hum of craving you might have written off as a personal failing were never really about willpower at all. They were a predictable response to a very specific kind of design, and that's the real reframe. 7 days without ultra-processed food isn't a punishment, and it isn't a cleanse chasing some imaginary toxin. It's 7 days of giving your gut bacteria the fiber they've been asking for since day 1, giving your fullness hormones the 5 minutes they've always needed, and giving your reward system a chance to recalibrate to a world that, for most of human history, never had a bliss point built into it. You're not fixing something broken in you. You're just finally matching the input to the biology that's been there all along, quietly waiting for real food to show back up. So the next time your hand reaches for that crinkly wrapper without thinking, maybe that's exactly the moment we're thinking in.